women whom you'll get to know during our session this year. We'll structure this in two parts, three actually, in the sense that I want them to begin with self-introductions, talk about their background, where they work and how they work and what are their special interests. Councilwoman LaWanna Mayfield, Charlotte City Council, District 3, and Stephanie Yanis, Attorney Bertha Justice Fellow at the Center for Constitutional Rights. They'll begin with self-introductions. We'll talk among ourselves for a few minutes and give way and allow you the opportunity for some exchange with them. So with that, I'm going to ask Councilwoman LaWanna Mayfield to tell us a little bit about herself. And then Stephanie, if you'll chime in at that point, and we'll go to the next stage. I don't know if we need this.
I don't know. Can y'all hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, please.
So first, I want to say thank you so much for the invitation and give my apologies for us starting later than you anticipated. But as was mentioned, my name is LaWanna Mayfield. I serve on Charlotte City Council. We have a council of 11 members. We are a manager council form of government, meaning that we are part-time, even though this is not a part-time job. If you visited Charlotte within the last 20 years and then coming back to visit, you've seen that there's been a lot of growth, or if you've driven around, you've seen a lot of cranes moving. But prior to running for office in 2011, I worked for many years with the American Red Cross in their corporate offices. My background is accounting and finance, but I realized that I love going out volunteering. So I was a disaster service trained supervisor and went out after Hurricane Katrina and Rita, again the Iowa floods. I volunteered in our community for more than 25 years on multiple issues, housing, working with the homeless community. Equity and equality have been things that I have been passionate about for a long time. Prior to running for office, I had the opportunity to be the Mecklenburg Justice Project Coordinator for Grassroots Leadership. So I don't know how many in here know of SNCC and know of SciCon. Sci created Grassroots Leadership 30 plus years ago, and he and I had worked together on a number of different community events. And we were out one day at an event. He was like, so what are you doing now? And I had just transitioned from the Red Cross with the idea of going to school full time. And he was like, I want to meet with you before I fly to town. That meeting ended up with a job offer for a position that was being created that he said I could create however I wanted, because he had funding for a grassroots organizer. So I used the position to really look at what I felt was our biggest need at that time in 2008, and that was immigration reform, specifically relationships between our African American and undocumented Latino community, as well as working on issues of ending for-profit private prisons. Because we know that that system of incarceration, the history, if we have real conversation, we look at slavery, we look at the fact that work needed to be done, and we were not going to pay people. So we look at today, our incarceration system, and those that are making 25 cents or less an hour to create a lot of the goods that we may have on at this very time and just stamp a company's name on it. But in 2011, when I first ran for office, I actually was Charlotte's first openly LGBT elected official. My partner and I at that time had been together 5 years, now 10 years. We were actually married last September, a month after our 10-year anniversary, because I figured after 10 years we're not going nowhere, and we both old and don't feel like starting over. So with a lot of energy was put around that piece, but which I'm proud of, because okay, yay, history is made. But the thing that's always challenging is that in this day and time, we're still seeing the first woman, the first African American, the first Latino, the first Muslim, the first. And we're in 2016 at that time, in 2011. And at that time, I was only the second African American female to ever serve on city council. So again, our council is made up of 11 members, and we have the mayor. And the council members, once we have 6 votes, we move policy forward. But when I look at the role that I've been given and the role that God has played in my life, I have to go back to the fact that the snapshot is my father passed when I was 13. My mom passed when I was 15. By 17, I was out on my own. I grew up in South Florida in Miami. And at 18 or so is when I visited Charlotte and fell in love and felt like this was home. That what was there before, it wasn't a home anymore, but this felt like home. And I realized that I really enjoyed volunteering, and I am good at debating and questioning the status quo. And then God decided to do the craziness of saying, hey, run for office. So friends dropped that idea into my head, and I was like, why not? What's the worst that can happen? Well, you can win. And then the hard work starts. So I'm going to pause it there so that we can move on. Feel free to clap.
So my name is Stephanie Llanes. I am the great-granddaughter of a tobacco field worker from Calle, Puerto Rico. I have the great honor to have been born on Puerto Rico and moved to Florida when I was a baby. My parents were working class, both of them with high school education, and they gave us all they could, and it was hard. Both my sister and I had to go back to Puerto Rico often to live with my grandma because even though they worked multiple jobs, it still wasn't enough. With all of that, with their hard work, I was able to start at community college, and from there I transferred to Emory University in Georgia and went to law school at Berkeley, thinking that I was going to do, the civil rights law and, naive. And as I talked to some of our colleagues in the room, I quickly learned that law is actually a tool to dominate and exploit people, particularly marginalized people, and particularly my family and my ancestors and the people that I come from. I struggled for a long time in law school thinking maybe this is not for me. I was an organizer before I went to law school, and I continued to organize while I was in law school, and it was a struggle. But what I learned was that there was a way for lawyers to be a part of the movement, not to usurp the movement and supplant the movement, right? But to support it. And I was lucky enough to work while I was in law school with the ACLU in Washington, as well as the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. And then after that, which is where I work now, at the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York City. So my work particularly focuses on government misconduct and racial justice, so on issues of civil rights, immigration, government suppression of dissent. And we call ourselves movement lawyers, right? Because we believe that we actually don't want our jobs, right? Like if we are doing the same kind of work 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now, that means we haven't done our job correctly with the people that we're working with. So, people often ask me, like, what do you want to do long term? I'm like, I honestly, I don't want to be a lawyer forever, right? And so that's the philosophy that I'm coming from and that I hope to continue. I've been working closely with Black Lives Matter movement, the immigrants' rights movement, and the Puerto Rican liberation movement, and I hope to bring a little bit of all of that into the conversation today.
All right, thank you. Well, I think all of you can see how pertinent, relevant these two women are to our conversations, deliberations this weekend. Let me suggest this. We have talked about addressing several different issues. I'll name some of them. I'm collapsing them. I'll put them on the table and let these two go at these issues in any way they like. Basically, again, we're at the end of a long weekend of conversation addressing the theme, the nation state, and everything you can throw under that. Different levels of government beyond, including literally the state, with North Carolina as an example of such, and how such polities or entities behave or perform, and for lots of good and lots of ill. Some of the issues that that we propose to talk about include income or economic equality, voting rights, immigration, and obviously under civil rights, race and ethnicity issues, sexual orientation, and beyond. Let me set this up in this way. First, I'm going to ask each of you, from your perspective as elected official at the local level, and as a policy analyst, I like your legal critical studies perspective. How do you read or assess our current situation? If you want to take a piece of that, an example, whatever level of government you like. If we want to use Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the reasons we're here this year in our meeting is because Charlotte was, even as we met this time last year, roiling over a number of different issues. We wanted to participate in any way we could in the kind of conversation and deliberations there. So what do you think is going on, and hang the what is going on onto any of the particular issues that you care a lot about. Tell us what you think is front and center, what we should be concerned about, what we should look for going forward. Councilwoman, can we begin with you?
So that's a loaded question. So I would honestly say the most pressing issue is poverty. Because when you get to the root of looking at society today, those that are at the highest end of the socioeconomic rung, and that small handful of families that basically run the nation, versus those who are at the very bottom. And we love to talk about in any campaign, local, state, or national, especially national, the middle class. But the reality is that the middle class is almost being eliminated. And what is considered middle class today? So when you look at the poverty issue, that tags onto everything else. So you look at those who are in the minority. Well, you now have a nation being run by the minority, when you really think about it, opposed to the majority of those that recognize that when you create affordable housing, when you have communities that are diversified, when you have diverse job opportunities, and looking at the impact of neighborhood schools. And if you have a high poverty neighborhood, the chances are that school isn't going to necessarily, well, we know the chances are greater they're not going to attract the best teachers. And you add on top of that layer the fact that we underpay our teachers from the national level on down. And when you look at the realities of that cost of living. So today in Charlotte, when I moved to Charlotte in 1988, I was able to have a one-bedroom apartment that was around $375, $400 a month. Today, a studio apartment, not even a one-bedroom, a studio apartment will run you starting between $900 to $1,200 a month. That is affordable for who? Because not all college students, all seniors are in a financial position where they're able to afford that. And you look at that AMI, the area median income, of 30% and below. Well, using HUD guidelines, you should not be spending more than 30% of your income on housing. Well, total, when you add your utilities, if you have a vehicle, all those other costs, you definitely shouldn't be spending 50% of your income for your day-to-day necessities. So when we look at also our criminal justice system and who is targeted for our criminal justice system through loitering, through petty crimes, you're stealing food, you're stealing medication, you're stealing diapers, those necessities. And then you add on top of that, if you're a minority, being African American, Latino, Asian Pacific Islander, or LGBT, when especially trans. And if you're transitioning and you don't have $140,000 to $200,000 sitting around to pay for full transition surgery, and you're trying to find work in a state like North Carolina, which is a right to work state, where for any reason I can fire you today and there's no recourse. And then you think of legislation that was created that took away the ability for you to file a discrimination case on the state level. It goes to federal. Much shorter timeline, much more expensive. And everything goes back to that cost and that affordability and who has access. So that's why I say it's such a loaded question, because it's not one.
Right.
It is a combination of and is just such a huge umbrella.
Yeah, I agree. It is a loaded question. I think for me, one of the things that I think about when I think about just generally the issue of economic inequality is corporate power, right? We are currently experiencing the repercussions of increased corporate power meddling with the government, right? So when you have a case like Citizens United that passes and says that corporations no longer have a cap to fund elections and campaigns and all of that, you're going to see certain people, right, run billion-dollar campaigns, million-dollar campaigns that ordinary people just can't compete with, right? And so I was a student of John Powell at Berkeley. I don't know if any of you know him. And he talks about this idea of the circle of human concern, right? The idea being that the people that are within this circle are the people that are cared for, loved in society, period, by the government and interpersonally, right? And what we've seen throughout the years is different people being pushed out of that circle, Muslims, LGBTQ folks, undocumented folks, Latinos, etc. And what we've seen is a shifting of corporations being put in the center, right? So profits over people. And as we continue to see that, we see attacks on unions, right? They're not perfect, but we've seen a serious attack on unions. We've seen the mortgage crisis, right? And it's affected families dramatically. We've seen a war against the livable wages, which we've seen a huge campaign on, but it's corporations that are attacking these kinds of things. And so I think corporate power is something that needs to be challenged a lot. I think we need to increase unions, workers' rights. And I want to talk a little bit about Puerto Rico because I don't know if you all know, but over this past summer, Promesa, which is a bill that was signed by President Obama to take care of, there's a huge debt crisis on the island of $72 billion, most of which the benefits of that debt did not go to the people, right? It was a number of hedge fund managers and bondholders. And what we've seen is that the way that this bill and a board of 7 people that were appointed by the president and Congress members, none of which were elected by the people of Puerto Rico, will now govern the island. And among the ways that they want the island to pay for the debt is to put down the minimum wage to $4.50 to anyone 25 years or younger, right? And so I say that to say it's corporate power behind a lot of this. And so economic inequality, of course, is affecting the most vulnerable, and I think we have to attack it not just at a legal level, but really at a level that it transcends that, right? So who are we? What are we about? Who are we defending? That kind of thing.
Did you want to comment on any of that, or
Ditto.
Yeah. Okay. Now I want to ask you both. Let's talk briefly about some voting rights. Just through an election, all that means. We don't have enough time tonight. At your level, where are we in the state of North Carolina? I'd like for you, Stephanie, to address the national situation.
So when we look at North Carolina, everyone in here probably is already aware that the court stepped in and said, okay, the lines that were drawn by our current representatives, our House and our Senate are Republican-led. They own both houses. That happened back in, 2010, right after the presidential election in 2008, because everyone was like, we're done. We got the first black president. So you now have those that are in power that have gerrymandered to the point, and it's not just Republicans, it's Republicans and Democrats. So you have those that have created these maps that are the equivalent of a 2-year-old and a crayon and their first attempt at drawing. Because you literally say this room, I will pull out you two. No, I'll grab you. I'll leave you out. I'll swoop back around. I'm going to leave you out. I'm going to leave you out because you're a female. And you create this. But then you also have Democratic seats that were created that are all white. They took all the minorities out of their Democratic districts. So it really becomes that question that people keep asking, have we elected our representatives or have our representatives selected us? But I still say that can be challenged because we recognize that the United States is a two-party system. We'd probably be better served if we were a 4, minimum 5-party nation because of all the diverse ideas, but we're not. So you're Republican or you're Democrat if you're going to run for office. And independents and unaffiliated, you still have to choose which ballot you're going to receive. But I don't think we've done a good enough job of reaching out to everyone to have a voice. So I think what you've seen on this national level is a community that has been hurt by both parties. If you are working poor or non-working poor, underpaid poor, neither party has done anything for you in a very long time. So you had someone speaking to that, and we were so happy to have someone finally speaking to a part of our spirit that no one spoke to, that we overlooked a lot of other things that were very important. The fact that you had absolutely no policy agenda. So when you look at that reality, we have to go back to the fact that we allowed this to happen through the fact that you don't vote just on a presidential year. There's an election every year that you need to be voting in, and you need to hold your elected officials accountable. So you look at school board. Our schools have changed drastically. You have had people that have really pushed, and through the big corporate community, pushed moving away from public schools to charter and private schools, and saying that your tax dollars are now going to pay for this school, and we're going to reduce the funding in the public school system. You look at the local city council or county commissioner for North Carolina, and these people become your state representatives. A lot can happen on the national level, but all the power in North Carolina is on the state level. All of us, all municipalities, all 100 of us have to go to the state in order to get any legislation approved. We just came out of our council retreat 2 days ago in Raleigh, where we voted and approved as a council to go add to our legislative agenda to ask for permission from the state for us to give subpoena power to the Civil Service Board. Because as our community continues to grow, we are, like across the nation, seeing more and more crime happening. But we're also seeing abuses that are happening within law enforcement, because the question becomes, if I stop you and you have a gun and you pull that gun out or you punch me, I'm able to arrest you, but 9 to 10 chances I'm getting ready to come to your eulogy. There's a clear disconnect in the training, and the Civil Service Board has not been the responsible party that we would have liked, but our local community, and it's also education, because community demands a lot, but they're demanding from the wrong people. If you understand what I mean, you can't put certain demands on city council because we don't have the authority. The demand needs to be happening with your House and state representatives to release that authority, because we're under their control. So we are going to say, okay, please give us the ability to extend this subpoena power to our Civil Service Board so that we can be more accountable to the community. And that causes that disconnect because people feel like you're not representing them. But at the same time, I don't want to necessarily get engaged and educated enough to know what your representation means.
Just a follow up about the voting rights matter that went to court here. So where does that stand now?
It's still in the courts.
So what is your reading of the situation? What's
Unfortunately, I don't have a
don't know how to
positive view on it, because now that we have the current legislation that we have on the national level, I fear that we have multiple cases in courts. But before the election, the conversation was around the fact that those that ran for office on the state level last year because of the gerrymandering, a number of the maps were going to have to be redrawn. And a lot of those people were supposed to be on the ballot this year. That conversation is here. At the same time, the conversation regarding HB2. Well, people don't recognize, and maybe, I'm not going to say recognize, a lot of people don't understand that that conversation was a conversation around education, specifically. It was for students. It wasn't for the teachers. But if that conversation had moved forward and won in the courts, it would have opened the door for other protections to come down from the federal level to protect all people. That's another conversation that's gone silent. And so locally, outside of both of those, I have a neighborhood which is a slum building. And this slum multi-family unit that has high crime and extremely low poverty sits on land that's owned by one family that they have a 100-year lease on. But because the family is the Spanglers, and because of who they are through philanthropy, just as the Rockefellers, I don't know why we forget they burned down the whole black town and then started PR, and all of a sudden, magic, we're philanthropists. But you have this neighborhood who has completely gone down. The federal government has come in. Silence now. But you have people who are paying entirely too much for complete slum living. But also you have a office manager that has the ability to write on your credit report to say you haven't paid your rent. Even though I've done no repairs, and you call code enforcement to come out to the home because it is unsafe for you or your children, and now you get to control their destiny, because at the end of the day, your credit is extremely important and we live off credit. So they have the ability to control that. But because of who this family is, and because as a society, we never want to call out, because they might be a potential donor. They might be a sponsor of something. So we don't want to address all the horrible things that they've done or currently doing, because look at all this great that they're doing. And we as a society have got to stop being silent. We have to start calling that spade a spade, and we got to start calling BS. I'm going to lay my card. I call BS on that. I need you to recognize this is not good, but if we don't do it collectively, you're one voice, you're the crazy person. You have a problem. You get labeled. We no longer take your calls. We don't accept your emails because it's all you. But when we collectively have that voice, we will make that difference. And as you can tell, I get a little passionate about this.
You're one of the more passive members of
Right. I'm extremely quiet at the dais.
Stephanie, you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. Yeah, so I think leading up to all these things that you're seeing in North Carolina, right, like Shelby County, the case, which is the case that essentially gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, but particularly it was Section 4B, which was a pre-clearance formula, and it was established because there were states, including North Carolina, that any time they changed a voter law, had to get that pre-cleared first to make sure that certain populations, i.e. black communities, were not being disenfranchised, right? And what bothers me about that is there was silence around that case, right? Like our community at large, like the country at large was just completely silent. Our Democrats were completely silent about it. And here we are, right? And here North Carolina is, and I was talking to one of our colleagues, and I was telling him, you know, there was a study conducted not too long ago saying North Carolina is essentially no longer a democracy, particularly because of this issue. So that's one thing, and I'm glad to hear that there are cases, although again, it's going to be stuck in the courts, and who knows how that's going to go. But the other
likely Supreme Court.
It could potentially get to the Supreme Court, but if it stayed right now,
the next nomination.
Exactly, absolutely. Who knows? The other thing I think at a national level, which is a lot of what we're seeing right now, is this idea, because Donald Trump is not only narcissist, but he also wants to make sure that he actually won by the popular vote. So he's made up this thing to where he's now saying undocumented immigrants somehow voted, and there's voter fraud. That's millions of votes, right? I mean, it's outrageous, and people have, repeatedly shown how this is not true. But this is a way in which voting rights become racialized, right? This is a way to criminalize undocumented immigrants, and particularly Latinos who are undocumented immigrants. So when we talk about voting rights, it's a very racialized conversation. This is about Black people. This is about Latino people. And so I hope that when we're fighting these narratives and these fights, that we are particular in that. We don't just hide from them and we have those conversations, right? Why was the Voting Rights Act established? Like, let's think about the context in which all of this was happening. Related to that, Jeff Sessions, who's now supposed to be enforcing the Voting Rights Act, as you all know, he, in Alabama, came and prosecuted Black activists who all they did was register Black people at the time to vote. And this is the man that's now supposedly going to be the enforcer of the Voting Rights Act. And I don't know about you, but this is, again, another time where I think that the Democrats in office just didn't challenge him enough. They needed to be more explicit. This is not about, this is unconscionable or this is outrageous. This is violence. Like, people are going to suffer in unimaginable ways, and they're not going to suffer just like superficially, And so this is another section where we're seeing voting rights, consistently being gutted. So what can we do about it? And just some ideas that I've seen from voting rights activists is we have to re-enfranchise people, right? So, and continuously the conversation with gerrymandering and all of that, but let's think about people who have been disenfranchised, right? Particularly people who have been incarcerated are now out of prison and can't vote still, right? And again, it's another racialized conversation because who are the majority of these folks? It's Black and brown people. And so, there's a lot of work being done in that community. And the other thing is, I think there can be a lot of really great work done at the local level, and I'm glad that Councilwoman is here because, states and local level politics tend to be a lot more less constrained by federal and national political things. And so really radical work can happen at that level, and I think we're going to have to see that now more than ever.
And I think we're having to change that conversation because I had the opportunity 2 weekends, I think, ago to sit in on a discussion that Reverend Dr. Barber was leading on fusion organizing and what is real fusion opposed to how we've done organizing in the past. He was speaking at the Creating Change Conference in Philadelphia, and I was there invited to sit on a political panel. So I brought that back, and that mindset of the reality is I have to work with my Republican colleagues in the General Assembly. And one of them in particular, Representative Dan Bishop, who has been a strong advocate for anti-anything. It just so happened we had a legislative dinner. And in the dinner, the way they set up the tables, Representative Bishop was right across from me, and I had Senator Joe Ford next to me. So we ended up having a different type of conversation in a different space, and we actually had a really good conversation because I'm like, there's some things we fundamentally do not agree upon. But you say that you are extremely religious, and you believe that your relationship with God is the highest power. So let's think about that in a way of how are we impacting people through housing? How are we impacting people through job opportunities? How are we impacting people when you think about the legislation that you all create and how it impacts the other municipalities when we're trying to do good? So what I took from Dr. Barber's conversation is I need to meet you where you're at and recognize we're not going to agree on everything. But if your core is your religious belief, my core is my religious beliefs. The work that I do to try to help others is in the foundation of the fact that you had a man that walked and talked to any and everyone that would be considered less than outside of a building where you are making hundreds of millions of dollars a year and not paying no taxes. That's a different conversation. But the impact that you have, if we're going to have that conversation of voter fraud. So Trump was correct. There is voter fraud within his own family because his own family members are registered in 2 separate states and able to vote. So when you look at, there needs to be an immigration reform, but it needs to be a comprehensive immigration reform. And we Democrats refuse to have that conversation on the fact that under President Obama's leadership, we had the highest deportation rate of those who were undocumented. we also won't have a real conversation of what was OFA, what was the impact of Organizing for America to the Democratic Party, and where is the Democratic Party today. So I am highly offended, and if you follow me on Twitter, you know I'm extremely vocal on the fact that there needs to be a complete overhaul altogether, because none of these people should be supporting any of these candidates. I don't care that they're Republican, they are completely unqualified. You have someone who is getting ready to be appointed as the head of education who is clueless. You are anti-public education. You want to teach forced religion in school. Okay, well, which religion are you choosing? Because I could have sworn what I read said that this country was founded on those escaping religious persecution. We're not going to have the conversation of you finding a nation that was already occupied. That's a whole nother conversation. But, okay, we're here, and you're saying that this is what you see as the right way, and wow, we're going to create legislation to prove that point. And then you have someone, like you said, where all you want is to be liked. You narcissists do not need to be at the helm of that button, because if you want to be liked that bad, you need to stay in reality TV, because you're affecting our lives. We are dying. You have seen an increased number of trans people being murdered, and those murders go unsolved overwhelmingly. You are seeing an increased number of Latino and African Americans being murdered, and those murders go unsolved. But you want to be concerned because somebody said, well, you know what? Because don't trust your own eyes. At the inauguration, pay no attention to all these empty seats in the bleachers. Pay no attention to this crowd. Oh, that crowd, we had rain. Okay, we stood in freezing weather when President Obama was elected and re-elected. It was like 12 degrees out there, and we were out there. But you want to spend time on this instead of talking about policy, and your inner circle is talking about the fact that you watch entirely too much television. This is the nonsense we're having to deal with, but we have to take responsibility. We allowed this because we did not organize. We did not talk to our neighbors. We did not go out and hold people accountable. Once they were elected, we said, okay, I'm just going to leave you to it because I'm too busy to worry about what's going on. So we have to take some personal responsibility of the role we play. We're supposed to be teaching our children that it is not okay to bully. It is not okay to pick on someone that's different than you. It is not okay to lie. It's not okay to steal. But we just lifted that up as primary goals of what you should be. We have to sit with that and own it. And not say, well, in 4 years we're going to do something. No. Next year, there's going to be an election. Get this freaking Congress broken up. But stop just voting for someone because they're Democrat or because they're Republican. Make them prove where their policies lie. That means you have to identify, support, and get elected that person who you think is going to move in. Just because you don't donate to me, you're not going to get any more access to me than that person who doesn't donate or that person who doesn't vote. But as your representative, if you contact me and it falls within my wheelhouse, my job is to do just that. My job, and assist you. I'll give you an answer. You might not like it, but you'll get an answer. But we have to have that expectation at all levels, not just on certain individuals.
Well, listen, what I want to do now is give this circle of friends an opportunity to have some conversation with you. The only thing I'll say is you can't go on and on and on. Now, they can, but
okay, I'll try to keep my response in a minute.
Pointed questions or issues you want to raise. So let's give it a few more minutes. Councilwoman has had a very long day. I'm trying to talk her into staying for dinner. We'll see if we can work that out. I know Stephanie has agreed to join us. But your questions or concerns, please. Kim George.
Two ones. One, what describe your district?
Okay.
And two, what is Fusion? How did
Fusion organizing?
Yeah, what define that?
Okay, so my district. So did anyone fly in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, So when you flew into the airport, you flew into part of my district. Are y'all familiar with Charlotte? Have y'all gotten around? Know of South End? Okay, heard of Carowinds. Carowinds is actually in South Carolina. It's actually built on South Carolina and North Carolina line. So my district, not too far from here, is South Boulevard. That's the dividing line. My district starts from right outside of Uptown all the way to Pineville to Carowinds, which is South Carolina. The airport, everything that's behind the airport. We have the Whitewater Center, everything that's at the Whitewater Center, and then coming back into town. So geographically, my district is the largest geographic district. It has around 120,000 plus residents in it. I have around 85,000 registered voters in my district, and because we are on off-season elections, I average around 7,700 people that actually come out and vote. Out of 85,000 plus registered voters. So my district is made up of the chronically underemployed to the upper middle class. So those are those that are living way above their means through, unfortunately, our current housing situation, to those that are in $1 million homes and out on the lake. So if you've been to, like right now, we have this major project that's getting ready to start. That's going to be a 20-year build out on the lake in an unincorporated part of the city. They're going to be incorporating into Charlotte. But what I'm really happy about is the fact that I got them to commit in writing on affordable housing on the front end and in all 3 phases. Because I'm like, I'm not signing off on you building yet another Valentine. Unless we're going to do this right and figure it out. And I needed it in writings because I'm not going to be here forever. So I need to make sure that whoever comes along knows that this is in place. So when we think about fusion organizing, so I'm going to give what I think is the condensed version. The way Dr. Barber explained it is when because Dr. Barber will tell you, he's still very new in getting involved around the LGBT conversation. So are y'all familiar with Creating Change? So Creating Change is a conference that happens annually. It's led up by the LGBT Task Force. So you have around 4,000 plus activists that come in and travel wherever this conference goes, that are true grassroots as well as attorneys, and that are doing the same type of legal social work that we need, that come together for this week to really talk about what that organizing should look like on the ground. Well, in Dr. Barber's workshop, that fusion is more than just identifying partners. It's more than just working with the AME Zion Church or with the Pentecostal Church and working with some members of the community. It's really fusing the conversation together, meaning, okay, you're not there on LGBT, you don't understand it, you don't get it, but I'm going to go to this rural town, Buncombe County. How has the impact of legislation from North Carolina affected you regarding the fact that we did not expand Medicare? The fact that we have eliminated unemployment. Those everyday issues of withdrawing services to community. How is that impacting your daily life? That fusion being, what are those pieces that we do agree on that's working on equity and equality? Here are things that we clearly connect on, and we know that that's an issue for access and equity and health, especially around health. Then we're going to fuse together, and we're going to be a part of the Moral Monday movement and be at our General Assembly to march and protest, because this is affecting. So he had an example. He had a white man. Dr. Barber's so funny. So he was walking with his cane, and he was going out into some of these rural areas. And he got out of his car, and there was 2 older white men sitting over to the side. And they was like, yeah, that's him. I think that's him. That's the one. And Dr. Barber says, even though he's found Christ, he still can't figure out how to get his cane to find the Lord. So he was like, he was ready, just in case the conversation went left. But what the men came over to say is like, you're that Barber guy, right? You're the one that keeps having all these protests up in Raleigh. It's like, so my brother-in-law, he lost his unemployment, so he forever coming to ask me for money. So I'm trying to figure out what we need to do. Can I come join that? Is that okay for me to be out there with y'all on for that Monday March? Can we join? That's that fusion of understanding is bigger than this one issue that they keep focusing on television. Because that's the issue that divides us. And while we're running around fighting each other, laws are being created that's getting ready to kill all of us.
Thank you.
Who else?
You know y'all have questions.
Rodney, yeah.
Thank you for that explanation of fusion politics. One of the things I will say, fusion politics really is trying to get together with people that you normally wouldn't sit with. And one of the things that we see with Moral Monday is watching the sort of wonder of having imams and Jewish rabbis come together and talk about how we need to work together, of having the LGBTQ community and the African American church come together and talk about how we can work together. And it really is, in part, this idea. It comes from, the notion of fusion really comes from the work that was done in the aftermath of, or during the Reconstruction period, when blacks and whites were able to come together, work that was done in the Civil Rights Movement when labor was joining with the African American civil rights leaders. And the notion is that we are not strong enough to have the victories we want when we work alone. So if I need to make victory with environmental justice, then why don't I pull some healthcare advocates in? Because you can't have a healthy person without a healthy environment. And why don't I bring some labor people in? Because your concerns. And ultimately, I say it this way. We can never, we can't, I don't want a world where we have good education and poor health care, or good health care and poor women's rights, or good women's rights and poor voting rights. I want victories in all these areas. And the only way to do that is to come together. So in part, that's the essence of what fusion is. But I want to get back to you. I want to mess you. Can I push you for a second?
Of course.
Very, very briefly now.
How in the world can we have a city council in Charlotte that has 9 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and we can't get victories on the basic things, basic progressive policies? How in the world is that possible? And I'm not blaming you, I'm just asking you to inform. Because it seems as though, with whether it's policing issues, in your area, affordable housing issues, we always seem to come up short when we should have, I mean, this should be easy.
Right. Political will and political ability. I challenge my colleagues all the time on that political will. But you also have to think about...
You also referred to the state.
Yes,
Limiting
but the state limits us. There are a number of things that we cannot do, but there are a lot of things that we can do locally. It only takes 6 votes. And that's where that political will comes in. So when you look at who is able to run for office, when you look at the reality that as a part-time job, our base salary is $18,000 and some change. I can't live off of $18,000. It's just, it happens. Once you add in technology, and when we get reimbursed for mileage, when we go outside of the state or things like that, it probably comes up to about 30. You still can't survive in Charlotte for 30,000. So you think about who are those that are elected. I have a real estate attorney as a colleague that definitely benefits him. I have someone who is retired that's independently wealthy. I have 3 that are wealthy, retired, one from the federal government, one from their own law firm, one who is a consultant but also financially well off from investments and or marriage. So there were 3 of us on city council who were working and trying to do this job. I do this job full time, but that's, again, because I have an amazing partner at home that's crazy enough to allow me to do it full time. But we qualify, honestly, for all the same services that I'm fighting for in the community. I'm watching my neighborhood be gentrified and homes that are valued at $350,000 plus being built across the street from my community that's less than 30% home ownership because of the decline. So when you have, a 2-year cycle, so every other year we have to run, that means you may have 15 months to get work done. You have a manager council form of government, meaning the manager runs the day-to-day. Staff brings to us what they identify as important. So we just recently had a conversation about Major League Soccer. We had that conversation in a week where the request was for $43 million to help a billionaire have yet another hobby. Council said no, but that's not always the case. But yet, things that we have been pushing for, like access to use our own housing trust fund dollars to do more around workforce housing, to do more around job creation, to support different programs, that takes so long to bring forward that by that time you may have changed council 2 or 3 times. And every time a new council comes in, they come in with new ideas. And the community says, you ain't do what I want you to do, so we're going to vote the bums out. Okay, and then you get someone else in that starts from scratch trying to learn what they need to do and not coming in with a clear understanding that it takes 6 votes, so I have to work with you to get those votes. But you're absolutely right. We have 9 Democrats on council by letter. Because if you look at their votes, if you look at their history, and you look at how they have legislated for the multiple years that they have been in office, then you know that you do not stand for democratic principles. We are a very pro-business state, and we are a very pro-business city.
All right. I'm going to give Stephanie an opportunity to make any closing comments you want about any of the issues.
We're going to close already?
Talked about. If you stay for dinner.
I have already canceled my plans.
Okay, good. Stephanie, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so we just witnessed a historic march in the United States a few days ago. And I think what that showed us is, and the conversation and the questions that you just raised, which were great questions, is that the country is in desperate need of a new political party that's actually representing the people.
Yes.
And so there were 60 million people that voted, but there's 238 million people that could have voted in this country. It was low turnout rates for a lot of people. And so I think that it's showing us that we are in need of something different. There's a lot of conversation around the fact that, 81% of the voters who are white evangelical voted for Donald Trump. There's a lot of conversation that was 53% of the white women that voted for Donald Trump. But people are failing to realize that it wasn't the majority of white people that voted for Donald Trump in general, right? So I'm saying that because even though that is the reality, and that is something that we need to deal with, right? That is not the end-all be-all, right? And as we're talking about fusion, which I never heard before, we have to think about ways in this moment, people who are organizers and doing the hard work, at this moment, people are questioning everything, right? People who never questioned stuff before. And we have to really do the hard work to organize these people, hold people accountable, but it's not every 4 years, right? This work is hard. And so I say that as someone who, has been working extensively with Black, Latino, Puerto Rican, communities in which, justifiably so, in the Black Lives Matter movement, it's been Black-led and Black-centered. And even those organizers in the movement, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, are talking about we need to build something much bigger because we're not going to win alone. We're going to keep dying.
Amen.
And so I just hope that, in whatever work that you're doing, I think we can't do it. Like, I think, as a role as a professor, well, what can I actually do, or as a scholar? And it's like, I think it was Robin Kelly that said this, but it's like, if your work just stops at your book, or if it stops in your classroom, then you're actually not doing the work.
Amen.
So I hope that's something that you take away from this, and I look forward to talking to you all after.
Join me.